What's up, everybody? We are one man down, but not a lack for trying, I guess. Hey, Sarah, how's it going? So, yeah, this is going to be more of a dialogue than a trialogue. But this week, I've got my co-host Ethan with me, and Ethan, go ahead
Salute.
and tell them where they can find you.
Well, Ethan Indigo Smith on the usual social media suspects. Easy to find, should be. I got a few books out there, and I am frequently writing articles as well. Um, quick, quick Google search should find numerous articles of mine, and appreciate everybody. And Edless, thanks for making this happen.
Well, thank you. We're here really late because we had some time delays this morning, and we were hoping that at some point Ricardo would step in, but it's okay if he's not. We could still go on without him. Make sure to share this with your friends. Hit the like button, you know, and smash the like button or like the smash button, one or the other, as Donald likes to say. But yeah, so I've done a couple of interesting podcasts this week. One was about the Green Man earlier today with Gray Pilled. And then it actually matches quite well with that. The night before, we were talking about the phenomena with one of these UFO researchers. And it seems like there's a continuity between this Green Man character, Pan, UFOs, Bigfoot, basically any phenomena that is unexplainable out there in nature is almost like part of this whole system of divinity and weird kind of spiritual relationship that humans have with nature on a much deeper level. So we see what we kind of want to see in that process. And what we're seeing now is the opposite of that, especially last week with all the Western governments. This was like the big rollout for them to come up with the solutions of the chaos of the previous couple of weeks. So in UK, we've got Keir Starmer telling everybody that we're going to put everybody into a digital ID grid that's going to save you from immigrants. They're not actually going to stop the immigrants, but they want you to take a digital identification so that you can be saved from immigrants that they're going to keep letting in and keep giving the IDs to. And, in America, we sort of see the same rollout of that happening. And we also see that with the death of Charlie Kirk, they really, really want to get their hate speech laws in place. So I think last week was sort of like it was the soft rollout of the agendas that they were going to be pushing anyway, whether or not any chaotic events happened. It was just sort of like, well, we could just change our agenda, or at least say we're changing our agenda to fit with whatever your needs are for the moment, and then we'll just switch back to whatever we want to do. And so I think it was a pivotal week. We're getting close to the end of September. We're talking about the end of the let's see, third quarter of the year, going into the fourth quarter. And so this is the time when they're really going to start to, focus more on these big consumer sales. And so what they're hoping to do is start to roll this stuff out so they can matrix this into controlling your purchasing ability and everything like that. What do you think, Ethan? Anything stand out to you as being very symbolic or emblematic of what's going on in the world right now this week?
This whole recent theme of more pressure upon more speech is something that I think is very political and influential on our lives, and also symbolic, because it really leads to this whole control of our thinking. I think the intimidation factor of putting more military in more public places is also part of this restriction towards fear. But it also beckons to a really thousands of year old modalities of repression. And that is why the First Amendment is first. And that is why when repressive government institutions try to make moves, they have to restrict freedom of speech in one way or another. England has long been doing so, although their recent trends have been more extreme. Recent being the last couple of decades, even. But we, of course, made the First Amendment because we were dealing with kings as ridiculous as some of our present leaders. And King George III, I think, was emblematic of a crazy despot. The guy had numerous neurological diseases and was in control of the world's most powerful army at the time. And we made our Declaration of Independence, which was a list of essentially wise FU proclamations declaring FU for transporting slaves, FU for this. Well, that one didn't make it into the Declaration because there was a contingency. As the story goes, we're not sure exactly why the renunciation of slavery didn't make it into the Declaration of Independence, but likely representative from South Carolina and a few other guys said, well, we're not going to sign on unless you remove that because that's our state business. And so, again, all these things keep on happening where one entity wants to bring some form of liberty, and you have other entities that are dependent on anti-liberty employment, anti-liberty institutionalization across the board. So I think the First Amendment is made up of the 5 freedoms, which is really important. It's the only amendment with 5 individual empowerment powers, really, right? And it's really made to stop, I think, government transgression because the sharing of information is that important. And the joke is that the First Amendment is first because that's how we deal with despots first. And then the Second Amendment backs it up, right? And the third, they all kind of work in an order of operations of confronting oligarchical despots, really, from England on up. Though, of course, we see the United States as an institution has not always been anti-oligarchy. It was in certain frameworks. So I think it's an important thing to realize that the First Amendment is first for a reason. And as we see right now, catching hints of, the First Amendment will be the first to go when our liberty is threatened, because it is
necessarily has to be.
It has to be by way of how humans work. The first thing they got to do is eliminate speech because they're trying to eliminate truth. So they have to stop it. And look, what was happening in the Soviet Union is very similar as to what's happening today. First, they go after the comedians because the comedians really bring some stark evidentiary truth in a way that most people in the journalistic world, in the broad media world, can't and don't. So yeah, they always go after the comedian / drama play storytellers.
What I like to think about when it comes to this freedom of speech issue is the idea of maybe we never really had it, and it was always just sort of sitting there, just making us feel better about the fact that they never really respected freedom of speech. But they always tell us it's about, they don't want you to yell fire in a crowded theater. Like, that's the constant refrain, is that, well, without some laws, somebody's going to do that.
Yeah.
Well, who's always the one yelling fire in a crowded theater? Think about Iraq 2003. What are they doing? They're yelling fire in a crowded theater. And they're like, all of your emotions because of 9/11 has to now be poured into Iraq. This thing that everybody knows had nothing to do with 9/11. They were literally crying fire in a crowded theater to get everybody to do what they want.
Really good point, Headless, because that really illustrates the collective knowledge. The knowledge was there that these were disconnected events, but the emotion overruled all that knowledge.
Right. Which is
And
exactly the idea behind fire in a crowded theater. Is they don't want people's emotions to get the better of them
right.
when somebody else does it. When they do it, they definitely want the emotions to get the better of you. That goes into even the fight between George Washington and his cousin, King George III, is that George Washington was better at manipulating people's emotions than King George was. And if you look at it from the perspective of the British, they're looking at people who don't want to pay their bill for having the protection against the French and Indians several years earlier. And so they don't want to pay these taxes. But those taxes go to pay off the war that we just benefited from. So now Basket Case America is saying, we're not going to pay you back for the war that you waged on our behalf with British equipment. And we always say taxation without representation, but it was just a few years earlier that all of those Brits that we're now killing in the streets were fighting on our side against the French and the Indians coming from the north. So who's really right in all this stuff?
Oh, I think that is a valuable question. Who is right? Rarely have I found an institution that is on the right side of things. And we see even in the French and Indian Wars, the French were in competition for control of resources with the English, who were also various colonialists were on either side or their own side, looking for control of resources, as were the Indians that assisted the French. Right? They were all looking to control the resources. Some maybe had noble intentions among them, but largely the whole team, the whole squads, it was all about the theft of land, the theft of resources. And so it's like almost as you get to the pinnacle of the pyramid system, these opposing forces from the opposite sides of the walls, they're closer and they're much more friendly, and they do the exact same things. So it's almost like, who's right? Well, you can find a rare individual, but I dare anyone to find an institution that is in the right. They're far and few in history. But I think that there's a misnomer. If you let the lesser devil in, how does that go? The lesser evil, you still let evil in. I've never in my life been presented with the choice that there wasn't a lesser evil. So it's like you really that's the world. So you can't not making a choice. That's a choice too. But I've never seen where there wasn't a choice between the greater and the lesser evil.
I think it's important to keep in mind that there was 284 years between 1492 and 1776, right? Because we think of the New World as, well, it was found by this guy, Columbus, and then 284 years later, they founded America.
All of a sudden,
right? So those are probably the most important years for the formation of the country than anything we have in our history books, because our history books are immediately tainted by the fact that now it's this new regime that's writing all of the history. So that 284 years between, British colonization and Spanish colonization and what we have in 1776 should be considered to be more formative on who can you honestly call the good guy and who can you call the bad guy. Or maybe this one works even better. Which one works better for you? Because certainly we can look at Britain now and say that doesn't work for us. That is,
well, we figured that out 250 years ago, right? We knew then.
Right? Almost as long as we were British colonies. So
or territories, really, because they probably it was no choice. No one had a choice. And even when the Revolutionary War started, they were like, people were like, oh, "What? You can't beat England." So like
right,
the whole few hundred year or many decades before that, people have had that opinion. You can't stop this force. This is like the biggest force on earth in history so far.
right. But I think that was the whole idea, is that we're sort of given to looking at the results instead of seeing what the roots are, the roots and the seeds of this whole system that we see growing up around us. And what I think they're most afraid of is our ability to laugh at them, right? Because, like you were talking about, they didn't think it was possible to
It's
beat
so
the
true.
British, right? And so the British wanted to clamp down on freedom of speech so that the colonists couldn't laugh at them for being a clown show. And if you've noticed in all these videos of these cops coming to people's doors and arresting them for social media posts, they're not laughing. Nobody inside of those situations are laughing. And they've removed your right to laugh at these clownish behaviors because they could punish you for laughing at them now based off
I,
of somebody somewhere being offended by it.
it's I hate to sound like a New Yorker that I am, but it's like America, or the United States, I should say. We've gone so soft, not only in the direct way as what you're talking about, but like we've got so soft. Luckily, we've been in an education system that does not externalize an enemy for internal control, because a lot of countries do that, right?
Oh, we
Uh,
do that.
but it's not taught in our education system that this is the enemy. We get that culturally, we get that from religion, we get that from our peers and our family. Absolutely, Headless, you're right. But in our political system, in our constitution, it's not written that we have an enemy. And in our education system, it's not written that we have an enemy. But what has happened is human beings are so dependent on having an enemy. It's as if the United States has gotten so soft that we're looking for an enemy now inside where there's not even one. And people might say Soros, I say Putin, but there's all kinds of external institutions that would love to input division into this country and have us soft Americans hating one another rather than not having an external enemy, but just not being in that mode, right? Of weakness, which it is weakness to hate and to fear and to look for an enemy where there is none. So I think that's how soft we've gotten, that we're looking for enemies where there are only phantoms or neighbors.
Well, I think one of the problems is that the softness is the result of having too much peace in this country. Iron
And
sharpens
absolutely,
iron,
all this, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
and we haven't
That's
really
like
had.
Ecotopia, where they would have tribal battles just to get it out. Their whole system
Right.
was way better than that, but they had the system for the young men to just get that bullshit out. You need to get it out. Sorry, Headless, to interject.
But that's the point, is they don't want us to have this sort of intense internal rivalry
Yeah.
that then leads to strength ruling the day, because in a lot of ways you have to have that intense internal rivalry between elites so that you can have meritocracy. And a lot of people think of meritocracy as winning in the market, but it also counts if you're the winner who stands on top of the corpses of your enemies, right? Like,
Well, and
that's a meritocracy too.
it can also count as being honorable among dishonor, right? That people who don't want the leadership, sometimes they're the ones we should give the leadership to. In other words, the people who
In
are
some
looking
way,
for leadership, usually they got problems.
the way it seems is that when things are peaceful and when good people don't feel like they have to step up to protect their families, they end up expending all of their righteous indignation and all of their fire on things that aren't going to exist if the government keeps going in the same direction it is now. So there becomes this sort of loss of, I guess, vision. Like, where are we going as a country? Do you think Peter Thiel has a better idea of where we're going as a country, or WEF, or any of these other jokers?
That is the wild thing. The beautiful thing about the United States is that we don't have a programmed direction that you and I can do whatever the heck we want or not do anything we don't want to. And most people, that's a good thing. But when they're institutionalized oligarchical collectivists like Mr. Thiel himself, oh, they got plans. They got wild plans, right? Where normal people that are just trying to live their life and be happy, we don't really operate like that. So yeah, good point. Good question.
Unfortunately, if they're the only ones with the vision and they're basically the slimiest of the slimy, corrupt individuals, then what shot do we have at actually having a better future? See, the problem with the knee-jerk reaction to the idea of dictatorship and oligarchy is that we think that what we have now is not that. When what we have now is literally survival of the worst. We have a kakistocracy. And that's kind of how it works when you're talking about foreign influence. They're not looking for a strong domestic leader. They're looking for a weak, spineless leader who will do whatever he's blackmailed into. And so this kakistocracy we've mistaken as sort of our dominance of the globe. What we have now proves our domination. Now, how do you get out of it? I think it becomes clear that you can't give in to the systems that they're trying to impose on you, right? So, this digital ID card, you have to say, look, I'm willing to let you try and make me homeless or imprison my family members or imprison me, but I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to put it on whatever you want me to put it on. I'm not going to sign on the dotted line. And what you'll see is that they'll do it anyway. They already own all the records. So it's not something that you can have an influence over. Most of the stuff we see happening in the world is for the purpose of demoralization, because the people putting it on are some of the most demoralized people on the planet. They do what they're told. They don't ask questions. They try to deliver the news in a upbeat kind of way, but each and every one of them is dead inside, right? And so, I come back to the idea that maybe if you have more life inside of you than they have in death as they push it out on you, your victory will be inevitable. But you have to realize that the vast majority of the stuff you see pushed out on you that you have no choice over is meant to demoralize you, is meant to keep you small, is meant to keep you thinking like the people who are delivering these messages to you, because they're done. They're cooked. They don't have any life. They don't have any spark.
And we can see that in the very etymology or definition of the word government. Govern meaning control, mente meaning the mind, and or state of things, and that being your personal state of things. It literally means that. So government, it says it right there, what they're trying to do. So again, to your point, a lot of the political movements and actions, they're all to affect people internally or externally, sometimes when there's wars going on, all to affect psyche. It's a battle of psyche, because once the flood of the people's psyche is at a certain place, there's no stopping it. Right. And that's, again, to the control of information flow and communication and the First Amendment. That is how powerful the human mind is when we get together and form a formidable collective and not a sheepish collective. Then we literally direct institutions. And it happens in every country all the time, even the ones that repress freedom of speech to a vulgar point that even our beaten down American society today would object to, right? But it does happen. The power of the mind is that strong.
Did you see what happened? And it wasn't Laos, it wasn't Cambodia, it was a different
Nepal,
Southeast Asian. Nepal, there we go. Yeah,
very,
perfect
very
example.
badass. And I don't even know the full story of this, but I guess there was rampant corruption
Right.
among the government, and basically the young people said, you know what, you can't really stop all of us, and and the army literally couldn't. They burned down the equivalent to the Congress building. Um, so I don't know where they're at. I don't know where it gets hijacked, because so many of these revolutions get hijacked into, you know, not the same corruption, but a contrasting corruption. So hopefully that won't happen. But pretty
Well,
amazing example.
it proved something that
That's right. That's right.
was known, which is that social media coordination can act as a hive mind for these different groups. And so the Nepalese government, who is openly corrupt, openly doing the worst things, decided they were going to crack down on all social media and put a government filter on all of it, kind of like China. And when they did, the youth in that country immediately rose up and took over every place, because even the military knew that they weren't going to have a future under the current regime, because it was a kakistocracy again, right? It was a rule by the worst. And I think, you know, Keiko Demon, Daimones, kakistocracy, like there's some interesting Greek that comes out of the word, where the what do you call it? Not the root word, but the prefix KAK, kak, which also means shit.
Classic.
So the kakistocracy
And it
functions
reminds
like
me of the new word "enshittification,"
great
which exemplifies the modern day predicament. Sorry.
shit coding, right? Shit coding is what these intelligence agencies love to do. They love to throw in a bunch of, completely unrelated facts that end up destroying the message. But when it comes to the kakistocracy, what they try to do most is they look at the prominent families, and then they pick the person with the most trouble in that family, whether it's through addiction or, womanization or anything you could blackmail him on. And then they kill all of his brothers and sisters so that he's the top of the family, right? That's how you know that you're under a kakistocracy, is you notice that the sibling under the powerful good person that rises to power is then, a drunk. It doesn't represent any of the father's sort of ambitions.
Well, and even that they have familial control in the first place is an example of just shittiness. But that really is striking when you see that happen. That the better ones are killed off.
Right. Well, I think it's just natural for them to, for most tribal societies, to lift up the people who have had the most successes in battle and say, this is the way we want to be seen, And so to have a lineage or a family line that rules over all these different tribes, I think that's just natural. They want to be associated with the winner, and
But maybe
that's
I think back in the day, like they were all winners, right? Like it wasn't like there was one that was more efficient. We were probably hyper similar in our look, in our capabilities, and so forth. So that maybe you're right. When one stood out, it was oh wow, this guy stands out. He's better than us. There's never been no one different than us. He's better.
well, the elites back then had this problem where they were highly militarily trained. They were pretty damaged by the time they came into rulership. You had Philip of Macedon. He took a spear to his hip. This is how they identified his grave later on, is because he had
Straight
the
hole.
place. Yeah, he had the tip of that spear still lodged in his hip in the gravesite with the same number of people as were in his family. So they were able to tell right off the bat from the descriptions who Philip of Macedon was, father of Alexander the Great, because of this wound that he had in his hip. So he was messed up by the time he got in there. And I'm telling you what, You think PTSD is bad today when you're using guns and bullets? Can you imagine staring into the eye sockets of the people that you're trying to kill with these sharp, pointy sticks?
Well, they didn't even have PTSD as a description. It would just be you're weak. You move on. You know, like it was.
Well,
It,
you,
it was like
you've
so
got
much
other symptoms.
more drama going on next week that like it was just another thing that they didn't have time to really. I'm sure
You
that
had
there
other
was
symptoms too.
a lot of people like just had to keep going.
Right. Well, you've got the vigilance angle, right? So, if you're in a battle like that for multiple days on end, you're constantly in vigilance mode. Your brain does not get out of hypersensitivity, right? So, weak or hypervigilant, I think they would probably be gravitated more towards the hypervigilance. And so these elites back then had to figure out a way to get a corner on the society so that they could be lifted up as the champion, whether or not.
But 2 generations later, they're back to being maybe normal, if not weaker than the average, right?
Well, I mean, we're nowhere close to the elites of the classical world. I
No, I'm
mean,
just saying back in the day, even like you live a life that's different than your dad, and he didn't live a spoiled life, and you do because he's successful. You're going to be built different.
right? That domination leads to debauchery. Debauchery leads to degeneracy. Degeneracy leads to destruction. So these people were in a constant sort of downward slide. As after they achieved dominance in their society, they sort of fell into the habits that made the last king sort of irrelevant, and they almost
Um,
ritualized this.
Don brought up a good point about front. He says frontline World War One PTSD clips are wild, and though it was, I think they called it shell shock back then, right? And actually, a lot of it was not only due to the grotesqueness of war, but the actual bombastic explosions that would fry and rattle people's internally, right? Not that it wasn't only psychological, but I think the bombs explosions were a big part of it, right?
Right, right. Well, what Sarah just brought up was Carl Crusher. When we were talking to him, he's talking about government as being the governor, like you have on an engine, where you can go up to that point, but you can't go past that speed. So if you're governed at 68, you can never go 70,
It's a
right?
great way to look at it. That's totally accurate.
And think about it. The first thing that these tribal warlords would do is they'd go into the town and start slaughtering the old people. You got to get rid of the
Potential,
way that they see
knowledge of the
themselves,
potential. Yeah.
right? So that you could implant your own new story into their culture, and so that you
And
can then become the God people.
and that's happened 1,000-fold to get to our current generation. That's happened so many times to humanity when we've been enforced limitations.
The problem is that we always think of the phrase, the winner writes the history. But there's a glaring example where the loser got to write the history in our own personal storyline. And nobody likes to bring that up because that should be the most suspicious out of everything, is somehow this one time the loser got to write the history books. That's the Bible, right? Is there any wars that you could say that they won in the classical period near the end? No. But somehow that religion took over literally all of these, Africa, Europe, and Asia.
Africa before Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you got to wonder if the stories that the winners told that everybody adopted were the ones that, represent the strength of that society. What does it represent when the losers get to write the story?
Well, I think they are the winners, but I mean, they be in the pacifist kind of ideal, right? They become the winners. But I think it's interesting. You've been talking about recently the how do you term it? The psyop of Christianity.
Right.
And in recently, in my obsession with the duality of polarity and looking at the Bible, and it is in the Bible, and I mentioned this before, excuse my repetition for everyone, but there's the Yahweh pillar, which is the severity pillar, because he's the storm god, creates through severe action. And in the Bible, they removed Asherah, which was the duality of polarity, the second polarity, who created with mercy. And it's so Kabbalistic, and it's so dualistic. And it's very much like they toppled one of these pillars and thereby removed the whole consideration of the Kabbalah and what that might orient one to, which is what they really want to limit with that speed governor, our potential as individuals. And they made it monotheistic, which is really monothematic, right? Because it just is such a brain fry to train people to be a certain way in their limited thinking, that it's I almost want to start saying, stop monotheist on monotheist violence, because they are like the founders of group violence upon another. If we didn't have monotheist institutions in the world, we'd be much better off. If in fact we had the dualistic idea, even, it'd be like much more applicable.
Well, I like to go to the narrative angle. So in the idea of the losers get to write the storyline, you'd be talking about a whole different sort of rags to riches mentality, right? So think about the movie The Matrix, right? Neo is kind of this loser who doesn't really have a future. He doesn't have any plan. He's got nothing going for him. He's the ultimate no-face guy who, can't really act all that well, but he is the hero that everybody identifies with because they feel somewhat like that. And
because at first, even when he comes into the real, right, he's the reject. Everyone rejects him. And in his unconscious world, that where it starts, he was also rejected, just to say.
Right. And it's the idea of the little guy taking out the big guy that really attracts everybody to the stories, because this guy who never stood a shot, he took over, he did it, and everybody take that away from him.
Right. The Jesus story is the reject becoming the leader too. And same with all of our favorite character from the Christmas story that is attached, the story that is attached to the Christmas story, rather, Rudolph. Rudolph the reindeer is the reject that becomes the architect or leader too. I think we just love that because we've all been there, like, I was too little. I was not good enough when all many different ways to experience it.
Well, I think it's necessary for us to sort of understand that we all come from the same place, and that some people get ahead because of their superior work ethic. And it really doesn't have much to do with their connections behind the scenes. And sure, there's like book after book after book of genealogies in that book, but the genealogy stuff, that's not for you. You're different now. You don't have to worry about genealogies because Jesus is coming back any day now. And you don't even really have to worry about having kids, because in Luke it says you probably shouldn't have kids or shouldn't get married. But if you can't control yourself, then you can get married. But it was very much set on this return of the Moshiach character for the last 2,000 years. And it's like, well, we made it this far. We could just go a little bit further. It's like the rats that they put inside of the tubes as they're swimming.
Oh God, it is like the rat experiment.
Right. But, in that desperation for the return of your Savior, you can almost achieve anything. Right? You could just keep swimming another couple of minutes, and then other couple of minutes turns into hours. It turns into days.
And I think that inclination, that psychological inclination that we have to see that everything is going to be all right when the sun rises tomorrow, or when we get to this part of the horizon, then it'll be okay. Governments totally use that. I mean, one could argue that all of classical communism was based on that. Hard days now, and it's going to be so good in the future. And we hear that same message today from the Trump team. Don't in a year from now or whatever, they keep pushing it, whatever, like, it's going to be crappy for a minute. So,
I'm surprised they haven't caught Trump with a bunch of silverware in his pockets. It's so obvious what he's doing. He's just looting the country. I mean, come on.
No, that's too small. He doesn't need the silverware.
But it's so obvious to us, but to a lot of the people who are still stuck on that treadmill.
It's partisan blindness. If you're partisan, it even says it in the word. You're only seeing part. You're partial minded. You're partisan.
I would say partisanship, but this Trump phenomenon goes outside of partisanship.
You're right. You're right. It is got some exponential deviance. From even what we know as partisanship, to where like you're writing off entire truths.
Right. They don't hear when you say it, right? They're only focused on that track that they've got playing in their head over and over again.
You know what is a new phenomenon too, not just within, say, that group, or even just the idea or the discussion of politics. When we say something, people are looking to find out what we're inferring rather than listen to exactly what we're saying. And I think that's like maybe useful for a lot of things, but sometimes people are just saying what they mean. And it's maybe just a symptom that we're listening to so many lies and liars that we're trying to figure out what do they mean by that, because we know they don't mean what they actually say.
Right. We question everybody's motivation on what they say. What I think is you could actually infer a lot about their motivation just by listening closely to what they say. You don't have to read it. Right?
No. Yeah, it's all right there.
The power of the Socratic method is still so much what we need in our regular society. It's where you don't have to accuse anything. Like making accusations, all you need to do is ask questions, right? And what you find is that the side that has fewer and fewer answers gets fewer and fewer people paying respects to them. And it's always the side in power that has the most questions levied against them that they can't answer by the side outside of power, who seems to be able to run the agenda somehow, right? Because we're always seeing the uniparty action, and the uniparty action seems to be across, these very obvious things that the classes have against each other, right? Epstein, for example, upper class, the lower class wants everybody to investigate Epstein. Well, that's something you'll never see. So instead we get these ideological contradictions, right? We no longer go by race, right? So anybody can be Republican, anybody can be Democrat. So we have to sort of lift that one out of the way. And then we have ideology that takes its place. So instead of fighting each other over race anymore, now we fight each other over ideology. And it seems like they're constantly sort of lifting and moving the conflict zones in society, as we're seeing now, where they're trying to blame this Charlie Kirk murder on some guy who was into furry porn, right? They're constantly lifting that veil and pushing it over a little bit to kind of get somebody pissed off at somebody else based off of this ideology stuff. And we really don't know what's going on. We haven't gotten any good evidence from anybody in any of these cases. But the more juicy and tantalizing the narrative, the more likely it is people fight over it. And that's where they want everybody at, is just fighting over the stupid details that they're never going to know.
Right. It's like with the movie JFK, who actually Jim Mars advised on that movie and was a big researcher into the subject matter. RIP Tim Mars. When finally at the end, the guy in black is discussing things with the lawyer, he's like, that's all of that is a subterfuge. It's who and why. It's the why that you really want to know, and you never will.
Right. And the same court system has gone unchallenged for thousands of years. We're told that something like common law existed in England, even though finding the examples of this and showing, hey, this common law is completely separate from the crown.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily. Yeah.
So the real question is, when wasn't it like this? And I think what you'll find is that it's far more likely that the principles of theater and the principles of religion were mastered before the concept of politics even existed. And so the concept of politics itself might be a function of religion and theater that we're not really getting the full grasp of. So offices might be related to heavenly hierarchies, right? And you see the headman occupying different positions in that society based off of kind of what the religious undertone. So I think before you can even possibly ever imagine the existence of a government, the first thing you need is a religion. You have to have a culture.
You need a cultural story for sure.
You have
even if it's the spaghetti monster.
Right. The cult pre-exists the government because the government itself grows out of the myth of God and religion.
And it's almost like you could see that in the United States, even though we diverted from being totally Christian. But look at what happened with George Washington, the supposed first president, great general. He had the eye of providence guiding him throughout his life. And was visited all these different times, even if you get into the story more. But the eye of providence directed the United States to go west and conquer the land that people weren't using. And so, yeah, very, very religious, even though it didn't say, hey, we're Christians and we're going to do this because I'm telling you to do it, but kind of did.
Well, I think that's why it's important to make the distinction of cult. Right? You have to have the cult first because cults imply secret knowledge, right? And if you're operating a religion, that's sort of the open secret, and then the cult is sort of the inner secret. And so you have to have sort of the coordination from religious beliefs to the cult to the powerful so that you can have a coherent society. And if you think about, back in the days when the grain god would return to earth, like the religious people would put on plays that would remind all the townsfolk to celebrate and also to sow their grain. And in doing so, the state would prepare their forces to make sure that nobody's coming in on raiding parties to just start snatching up all of the grain and what have you, right? Just as a rough example. All of these forces have to be coordinated using their only method of, displaying that information to get everybody coordinated on the same page, which would be like the theater or the town criers or these songs that would also go along with these holidays. And so the coordination of church and state had to be seamless. The thing that's kind of obvious to me now is that there has never, ever been throughout all of history a separation between church and state. Even if they write it into the Constitution, it doesn't make sense, right? Because the stuff that makes up our personal religious life associated with all of these forces, that goes way, way, way before 2000 years ago. And all of that stuff goes into making a state. But to forget about all of those forces that need coordination and all of those factors that must be, brought together so that you can have a functional state, you kind of have to forget about all those elemental forces that were once part of your religion, right? So the god of the blacksmith might be related to the guy who's doing the mining. and coordinating those festivals and those days to get everything working together in relationship to these, fields of pursuit would be highly advantageous for both the state and the religious angle. But we don't have that anymore because, again, we've, I guess, evolved past understanding how these energies are affecting us in these different fields, right? But in so doing, we make ourselves weaker. So, for instance, in ancient Greece, they had more feast days than they had, work days. And yet they built the Parthenon and all these beautiful structures almost as an afterthought of their unity and their constant.
But did the slaves get David's off?
Yeah, they did. They were more like indentured servants in Athens than they were.
I know some days. I know a lot of days they got days off, but
they had slaves that would own banks. Plato was a slave, right? So they had this servant mindset as opposed to more the Peloponnese style of Spartan slavery, which was much more brutal, right? But these different places had different conceptions of themselves, and the highest conception places often displayed the least cruelty, right? So Athens specifically, they stopped doing public ritual murder sacrifices of their goats and sheep and stuff because it was just, it was too much. So they're like, no, we're gonna switch over to this other form where we're bringing produce into the town, and we're gonna use that as sort of the example of how you can give back to your society, because all of this stuff was done as trying to set an example for people on how to, behave in a social situation, right? That's a big part of the ritual too. So when you look at it from the perspective of the classical world versus now, you can see that this ideological thing is almost entirely man-made, right? Like I don't see any ideologies taking over from not mainstream to mainstream without mainstream acceptance, right? So for instance, let's take, who's that guy? Medicus Molbug. You heard of him? Mencius Molbug?
I don't think so.
Well, he came out with this reactionary type philosophy in the mid 2010s. And then it really caught on, and a whole bunch of people got into this neo-reactionary movement, right? But it seems like that was pushed because now we can see people like J.D. Vance and all of these political insiders are now harkening back to this neo-reactionary movement that was pretty explicitly anti-democracy, run by one of these Catholic reactionary types, talks about Christian nationalism. What's interesting about the guy who was also really big into Mencius Mollbug was he also authored a paper in 2008 with a Jewish guy who worked for Obama about inserting convenient conspiracy theories into the conspiracy movement. Let me look it up real quick. But it's funny how closely the Catholic Church has worked to both push people in a more right-wing direction and simultaneously removed their ability to say no to a lot of the stuff that is going on right now politically. So you can only have a reaction in a very specific guided path.
The Catholic Church is its own entity, right? So it has its own motivations. And who's to say that the Catholic Church does not want more Latin American immigration into the United States, because that means more Catholics in the United States, because Latin America is largely Catholic. So, I mean, the motivations for a religious institution may not parallel entirely with the motivations of a political institution, but there may be some parallels at some point in times. But other times it's like, oh wait, why did you go that way? I'm going left here because this is for me.
All right, so I found it. It's called Conspiracy Theories by His name is where is it? Cass R. Sunstein and Adrian Vermeulen. And so Adrian Vermeulen is a neo-reactionary follower of Mencius Moldbug. And the other guy, Cass Sunstein, he's a policy wonk who was working for the Obama administration.
Yeah, I would have, if I saw anything neo-reactionary, I wouldn't have even looked into it, because this is separate from politics, but in Tai Chi, like, I really actively train to not react, but respond. And I might be repeating myself on the show. I refer to that concept so much. It is much better to respond than react. And even just look at that word. You're an actor. Again, repeat actor. And so who doesn't want to be authentic with their response? I prefer that rather than react. It is, I see their build on it, but I would just, it's no wonder I averted from that.
Well, think about it for a second. So we've got this progressive policy wonk from the Obama administration.
They're the same at the top.
Pretty leftist, right? And on this other side, we've got Adrian Vermeulen, who is a right-wing reactionary Christian nationalist, working together on a paper about conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
I mean, does that not encompass the full political climate that we're working on now? The two sides of this fucked up coin really aren't in competition with each other at all. It's more about.
I think if you put on the right glasses, you'll see that they're the same color. They're green. It's all about the paper. It's all about the money, right?
Right. This is the insurance policy. So in the paper, Cass Sunstein argues that it would be beneficial to the establishment to inject conspiracy theories into the alternative media so that you can get people chasing their tails and fighting over bullshit.
Division again. That's great.
And the two guys who authored the paper are hardcore Vatican right-winger and left-wing progressive WEF type.
Both sound equally frightening as of characters that I would not want to associate with.
It's old world communism versus new world communism.
Yeah. And collectivism the same, right? And they're working together to influence the psyche broadly of individuals broadly. And go ahead.
The more ridiculous the conspiracy theory, the easier it is for you to ban free speech. These crazies are talking crazy. We got to stop them.
and it goes to that like softness idea. Like, yo, if you step outside of the house with funny sneakers on, expect people to say things about your funny sneakers. If you're too soft for that, like, don't wear the funny sneakers. And I think we've like separated ourselves so much from each other that like we'll get caught out wearing funny sneakers and no one's called us out on it, and then be shocked that someone would have the nerve to call us out on our sneakers, and then that means that everyone of that type is a bad person.
Do you think if I just start wearing a toga everywhere that it'll suddenly become socially acceptable too?
I mean,
you never know. Other people might just start doing it.
People wear crazier things than that. But I just mean to say like that, like we shouldn't be so soft as to not accept judgment. Like the world, even by what we say, forget about what we wear. Like that is the whole concept.
Somebody's got to set the trend. Somebody's got to get out in front and set the trend.
It's all about getting criticized, because if you say something stupid or hateful, people are going to say, nah, F you, dude, you're whack. Wait, no, I'm saying this really hateful, stupid stuff. Yeah, no, everyone's saying F you, you're whack. Oh, maybe I should work on what I'm thinking and saying. Like that is what it's supposed to do.
Right. And that goes back to the idea of meritocracy, right? The people who can present their ideas the best are oftentimes the biggest, narcissistic weirdos. But at the same time, if there's that level of, hey, that guy can kill people, or that guy's just full of talk, you at least know what the score is when they get up to the podium. If everything's done at a distance and everything's sort of, WWE, we're just talking shit to each other, what do you actually know about any of the people presenting these arguments? What do you know about what they're leaving out of the arguments? Because I think that's the biggest thing. We're just starting to realize we don't hear any of the alternative perspectives because they're actively weeded out of every conversation on the mainstream, no matter how big or small the venue might be. If you've got an opinion that is opposed to any of the 3x5 card of allowable opinion, as Tom Woods likes to say, you're not included on all levels. This is one of the reasons why I liked C-SPAN back in the day, because they used to have a call-in program every morning. I don't know if they do it now, but they used to have a call-in program, and some of the craziest weirdos would call in and then, spout off about their crazy theories. And it was like, that's great. This is before podcasting or anything like that. But then, a couple of years go by, and then you've got all these alternatives. And now the mainstream can't even lift a finger to any of the alternative viewpoints. And even when they get a victory, like getting rid of Jimmy Fallon, I think he's pretty easily a victory. I mean, like he represents the deep state. There isn't anybody from the CIA he won't have on and then, fellatiate on the air for all of America to watch, But to see them instantly go against the regime and say, no, we don't want our First Amendment to be violated the way you're violating his First Amendment, that was really heartening, because at the very least, you saw them having that consistent. So there is some hope.
Consistency is so valuable, right? And I think that's how people get washed by, you mentioned before that it's even more than partisan. If you aren't holding on to principles, then it's really easy to get swayed by all these different messages and partisanship BS. But if you hold the principle, at least the God blessed First Amendment, then you start with something, right? And then you accept the liberty of others by way of accepting the First Amendment. It's a great start.
Well, here's an angle too. What if this was kind of like the slaughter rule? So ABC didn't want to cancel him for terrible ratings. So instead, they go over to the FCC and be like, hey, can you threaten us to get him off of the air just so we can get somebody else, some new blood in there? It doesn't look like we're the ones who are firing him.
Or I was thinking, can you make this perceived threat? We're going to suspend him, and then he's going to come back more popular than ever. Everyone's going to want to listen to why this guy got canceled. And of course he did. More popular show ratings than ever.
Theater.
And it's funny. Look at the terminology in good sir, you know this better than I. In the military world, what is the place of war?
A theater battle.
It's a theater. It's a theater. I was going to bring up a really corny appearing book from 1970. I read this from my dear dad's library when I was a young fella, and it's called Future Shock. And it's really interesting now, being that we're kind of in the perceived future that this book was exploring, in that it explores what was the future and now present. But also it's doubly interesting now because it explores the mind of the past and what they were thinking about. Actually, a lot of it really hit on what is occurring today. The transient nature of society, people moving everywhere, and the disconnection of people not having community foundation, whether it is with a church or any number of systems of community, and the overload of information, and at the same time, the estrangement and loneliness and separation of people. Even though we can communicate, like right now, we're communicating so hyper efficiently compared to how we can communicate pre this technology, right? But in the same sense, we're separated, right? So this book, The Future Shock, explores some really interesting ideas, and I'm mentioning it because now, as I was relooking at it, it does have that double value of what the past was thinking, you know. So I just wanted to mention that it's a really interesting book. Despite its cheesiness, it gets into some really provocative ideas relative to the problems that we're facing today, the communication problems, the disconnection, and at the same time more connected than ever before. Yeah, that's it.
Well, this is that's kind of an interesting lead in. So I was watching a movie that was it seemed like it was going to be kind of crappy from how it started. It was called The Triangle. It was all about these people who got stuck in the Bermuda Triangle, and you're thinking it's going to be some cheesy horror movie, but then it starts to loop back in on itself. So these people get onto a cruise liner that has nobody on board, right? And then time starts to loop back, and then one of the people realizes it, but then somebody shows up and starts killing everybody on board the boat, just starts shooting everybody, right? And it turns out that it's this first person who made this discovery that time was looping back in on itself. And so through multiple iterations, she's trying to save these people. And then at the very last one, she's trying to kill all of them so that she can hop back onto the boat that they got off of and, maybe paddle her way to shore. So as this is happening, it turns out that, all of these friends that, thought she was this great person didn't know that she was leading kind of a double life where she was abusing her child and all the rest of this stuff. And it was really dark. But at the end, her kid that she's trying desperately to get back to by killing all of these people, he ends up dying too. But when she got sent to go see him again, it was before the time that this boat left. So then she had to get back onto the boat and then relive the entire experience to do something different to try and save her son again. It was bizarre, but really kind of interesting on the whole time travel, time loop sort of kick. Is there ever an escape from a time loop? Are we living in a wider time loop right now? I don't know. But it's funny. Have you ever seen the movie Maximum Overdrive?
Oh, of course. Great. Classic 80s sci-fi horror.
Right. Well, think about how campy it was back then to have all of these, mega machines.
That's next month now. It's like a year and a month away now. Yeah. I mean,
how many months until we have the driverless cars start to go nuts and then herd us into smaller locations?
I mean, and it's happened already for individuals, not everybody. But my Tai Chi teacher and friend, and I've seen other people on YouTube and so on talking about the different AI models are kind of set up to like compete. And what if like they start really competing against each other and even going to war against each other without our knowledge, before our knowledge, and then all of a sudden one country's being invaded by another country's AI. The other country didn't even order it to happen. So yeah, I mean, it is tremendously scary, the maximum overdrive potential in the near future. The drone technology that we know that these institutions have, let alone what it appears they might have, it is maximum overdrive ready. I was going to mention something. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to mention a news story that it's a shame that, and I feel like this is the institutional programming of the United States and maybe the world. I don't know because I'm, so in tune with the U.S. being here, obviously. But I learn about geography and about different parts of the world through war and natural disaster. That's where I've learned to pronounce Baghdad and Mosul and Zaporizhia, if I'm even saying that right. But the fact that I can even come that close is due to the war in Ukraine. And its Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has been running on emergency power, emergency diesel generators for 5 days now. It's also been running on emergency storage pool water rather than the river water that it was near for many months now. But in the last 5 to 6 days, I don't think it's been the power's been restored yet. We have what is a shutdown series of reactors. It's the biggest nuclear experiment in Europe. I think it houses 6 reactors on site. So this is, I think, a big future shock, the ability that the world destroys itself. And, I was talking with Ricardo recently about moving, and he's like, yo, make sure you know where you're going when, disaster hits. And I'm like, well, try not to move near any nuclear power plant. I know that much. And, he had other considerations that were pertinent too, but just think that every natural disaster will lead to a potential oil or nuclear disaster as well. Like if the power goes out for too long, it can have meltdowns, So hopefully we all don't learn about Zaporizhia, but I just wanted to mention it because it's kind of a future shock news story that the human race is dealing with the nuclear era in our psyche. We have to deal with it.
It seems like this is the nuclear brinksmanship that's been going on over and over and over again in this region. It's either one of these nuclear power plants or it's Putin threatening to nuke Ukraine or anything like that. It's just constant nuclear brinksmanship.
It's almost become a joke, like the Russian threat, because these hollow threats, but it's very, very serious, very frightening. And in fact, different communist theorists from the Soviet Union actually thought that nuclear war would be beneficial towards communism, global communism.
Well, that's what they had in America too.
There's what's that? It's kind of what's that series? That sci-fi series? It's pretty new about these corporate institutions having interest into nuclear annihilation of the planet.
Right. That would be the Vault Tech. What was that show called?
Fallout.
Crawl out through the fallout shelter.
Great series. And the Chinese communists, though, have a different thought, largely anyway, on nuclear war. They don't think it's good. The media power brokers have put forth the idea that China has largely been the reason why there hasn't been some kind of nuclear. It could have been just a small nuclear bomb that Russia might have used. Also, I did hear that the Biden administration threatened if Russia engaged a nuke in Ukraine, that NATO would launch non-nuclear weapons into all Russian troops in Ukraine. So there may have been some kind of things like that. But yeah, the nuclear experiment is something we all have to deal with, and we all have it in us. It's biological and political.
I view the last 80 years of threatening people with the bomb over and over again, kind of like counting coup, right? So when the Native Americans would ride up on each other with their infantry, they would have these coup sticks. And so they would count how many times they could tap the enemy on the head with the coup sticks. And so that's sort of what the idea there between the nuclear powers threatening each other over and over and over again with nuclear annihilation, but never doing anything, is kind of like counting coups. So at some point, somebody's going to get bored of playing make believe with all this terminology, and they're going to push the button because why not?
Luckily, nuclear experimentation detonation devices are subject to time, so they can upgrade and maintain these vast arsenals. But luckily, one of the first things to go by time is one of the detonators. I believe is like the most threatened by time. So every 30 years or so, all the nukes, if they're not maintained, they become useless. Not that Russia does not have nukes, but a lot of it is, and that's what actually China refers to it as paper tiger, fundamental of a paper tiger. That was broadly one of their stances against it.
Well, I mean, I think we've got these spells that keep increasing every year. And the new spell is the new thing to be afraid of. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to cut back on all of their personnel because they don't want to have to enforce their rules anymore. It would be better if you were just compliant enough to stay in your apartment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and be afraid of everything all around you anytime you leave the house. Because that would make their job so much easier and they could lay off so many more people and make so much more money for themselves. So let's all be good slaves and remember that. They want you inside, they want you scared.
And, I heard this reference, it's a common trope actually recently, about American culture, and there is or isn't American culture. And all the racial and cultural things aside, American culture is all about casting the rulers off our back and saying, F no. That's what American culture is about. Whether you look at it in any political movement or the founding of our country, the revolution itself, this country is founded on, no, you could take your royal ass and shove it. That's American culture. And it's in rap and it's in rock and roll and it's in all these things that the rest of the world cops onto because we as humans all love that. Wait, they came from nothing and now they're something? That what? Like everyone says that's that, and that is the best thing about the United States is that we did that, not what they're putting forth now that they're strong and mighty and control people. That's like all the rest of the countries.
Right. But I think it's clear now we're reaching the end of a lot of convenient narratives that have just all run their course. Like Donald Trump isn't making any make believe about why he's invading places for their oil or, bombing places for their oil. We don't really have any of these fancy excuses anymore. It's all just pretty much out in the open now, which means that they're going to have to come up with a new storyline because this kind of storyline is not sustainable.
Don says, take this job and shove it. And that paraphrases the American culture I was trying to put forth. And Tara says, was maybe. And she ain't wrong either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is a great episode. This was the Dialogues with me and Ethan. So definitely check out Ethan's work on the Occult Research Institute. Check out those articles. And you can see my show on Thursdays if you have any sort of occult or weird paranormal events, or if you want to buy one of my pieces of art for $20 each, send me an email at headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com. and we will get on that payment method, whichever one that you have. So thank you. And if you include your address with your stories, Nick will send you some stickers. So definitely check that out and go out to his events because my artwork's going to be out there too. All of what he's making on that stuff goes to him and his little trip all around the South. So definitely give him donations so that he can afford that. It's going to be an interesting time in the next couple of months leading up to Halloween, which I think is going to be a big event this year. So See a lot of people getting ready. It could just be Wisconsin. Like the entire month of August, people were putting up Halloween decorations all over rural Wisconsin. I don't get it. These people just love this stuff.
Yeah,
They live for
I
it.
see it. I see it here too.
Well, this has been another Trialogue or Dialogue. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.